My name is Johanna Thomas, and I'm 28 years old. 4 years ago, when I was 24, I bought an $800,000 townhouse in Bucktown on Chicago's North Side. I had been working in investment banking downtown since I was 22. The first 2 years were about getting in, staying in, and saving enough that a bank would take me seriously. I lived with roommates. I ate cheap food. I did not travel. I did not date seriously. I did not buy anything that could not be justified as work, rent, or survival. At 22, I had a spreadsheet called House. It had a down payment target of $80,000 and a list of everything I was not allowed to want until I got there. I put my signing bonus into it. I put my year-end bonus into it. I put the money other people spend on weddings, vacations, nicer apartments, and normal weekends into it. By April 2021, I had the $80,000. I had a mortgage pre-approval for the remaining $720,000. I had the kind of exhaustion that makes a person mistake survival for confidence. I signed the closing papers with my hand shaking so badly that the banker asked whether I needed water. I said no. The house was not the reward for 4 years of work, not yet. It was the beginning of another 4 years. From 24 to 28, I worked 90-hour weeks, often enough that my body stopped knowing what a normal Tuesday felt like. I slept on my keyboard. I cried in stairwells and bathroom stalls. I gained 15 pounds in my first year, lost 20 in my second, and stopped trying to understand what the job was doing to me after that. Dinner was usually whatever arrived at my desk after 10 in a foam container on the firm's account, but every month on the 5th, the mortgage payment left my checking account, $5,500. Then the property taxes, the insurance, the HOA fees, repairs, the small expensive things that turn an address into a home you are trying to keep. I gave up my 20s twice, first to get the house, then to hold on to it. For 4 years, I did not take a real vacation. I traveled for work, slept in airports, worked through holidays, and told myself that the townhouse was worth it because it was mine. I had earned the down payment. I paid every bill after closing. I believed that if I could keep doing the math, no one could take the result away from me. My father had co-signed the mortgage. At closing, his name also went on the deed beside mine as part of the lender's arrangement, while my credit history was still thin. I did not understand every piece of title language at 24. I understood what my father told me. "This is a formality, honey," he said. "The house is yours. I'm only here so the paperwork works. When you refinance, we'll take my name off." A week later, after I mentioned that something the banker said had made me nervous, he emailed me a version of the same promise. "Johanna, the house is yours. Don't worry about my name being on the deed. I'm just the co-signer. This is your house. Save this email if it makes you feel better." I saved it because he told me to, not because I thought I would need it. For 4 years, I paid $5,500 a month from my checking account. I paid the Cook County property taxes, the insurance, the HOA fees, the repairs, and the small, expensive things that turn a house from an address into your life. My father did not contribute a dollar he did not offer to, I did not ask. His name sat beside mine, on a public record, while every private fact pointed in one direction. I lived there. I paid for it, I maintained it. I treated the townhouse as the thing I had built my 20s around. He treated his name on the deed as something else. I just did not know it yet. At the time, I saw a father with better credit saying he believed in me. When the statements arrived each month, I saw only my own name on the checking account that paid them. I thought paper followed reality. I did not understand that paper could be used to rewrite it. On Wednesday, June 25th, 2025, I got back from a 5-day business trip to San Francisco. I took an Uber from O'Hare. I dragged my suitcase up the steps of my Bucktown townhouse at 4:30 in the afternoon, and my key didn't work. I tried it 3 times. I checked to make sure I had the right key. I checked the address. I stood on the front stoop of the house I had spent 4 years buying, and I could not physically get in. And then I heard music from inside. I rang the bell. A young man I had not seen in maybe 6 years opened the door. He was wearing a bathrobe, my bathrobe actually, which had been in my primary bedroom, and he was holding a beer. And behind him I could see 3 other people sitting on my couch, and my kitchen island was covered in takeout containers, and the whole house smelled like a smoke shop. His name is Colton Duell. He is my cousin. He is my father's sister's son, 26 years old, and he had been living in Cleveland for years. I had last seen him at Thanksgiving 3 years earlier. He had flown to Chicago 3 days before I came home. He said, "Hey, Joe, you should have called first." I said, "Colton, what are you doing in my house?" He said, "Your dad didn't tell you. He gave me half." I called my father. I did not speak on the way over. My father drove 20 minutes from the western suburbs to my house in a state of what looked, from his face, like mild irritation, not shock, not shame, not concern. Just the small annoyance of a man who has been interrupted while doing something more important. He walked past me into the foyer of my house. He did not take his shoes off. He looked around at Colton's mess with the expression of a man who was surveying a room he had already decided belonged to him. I want to describe my father's face in that moment, because it is a face I have spent the past 4 months trying to understand. There was no guilt on it. There was no anticipation of my anger. There was, if anything, the mild social discomfort of a man who has been asked to do a small favor at an inconvenient time. He was not preparing to lie to me. He was not preparing to defend himself. He was preparing to explain to me, as though I were a client at his shop who had misunderstood an invoice. My father, in the foyer of the house he had just given to my cousin, believed with his whole heart that I was the party who had failed to understand something. I said, "Dad, explain to me what is happening." My father reached into his back pocket and took out his wallet. He removed a $2 bill, not a joke bill, a real, worn, official $2 bill from the Federal Reserve, the kind he had always kept in his wallet for good luck. He held it out toward me, the way a man tips a valet. He said, "I gave him half the house. Be generous. Go buy yourself another place, Johanna. You can afford it." He put the $2 bill in my hand. "I want you to know that I did not cry. I want you to know that I did not scream. I want you to know that I looked at my father in the foyer of the house I had built for myself. Out of 4 years of 90-hour weeks and 38-year-old business dinners and lunches eaten over a keyboard, and I felt the strangest calm I have ever felt in my life. The calm of a woman who has understood in a single instant that the man who had co-signed her mortgage had not been co-signing. He had been positioning. I put the $2 bill in my purse. I said, "Okay, Dad, I want you to understand what those 2 words did in my father's face, because my father had spent 28 years learning the version of me he preferred. He knew my argument voice. He knew it from the summer camp I did not want at 10. From the college he did not want me to choose at 17. And from the investment bank job he called a good way to become hard when I was 22. Whenever he cornered me, I argued, sometimes loudly, sometimes carefully. But I argued because some part of me still believed that if I explained myself well enough, he would treat my position as equal to his. "Okay, Dad," was not an argument. For a second, something in his face almost shifted. Then, it settled. He looked relieved. He heard compliance. He thought I was going to leave, cool off, and eventually accept a smaller apartment somewhere while Colton settled into a house I had paid for. He thought the $2 bill was the cruelest part of what he had done, and that time would make me forgive the rest. He was wrong. Standing in that foyer, I understood something I had spent most of my life refusing to understand. My father did not mistake me for less capable. He needed me to be less entitled. He could praise my discipline, use my reliability, and trust me to carry every burden placed in front of me. But he did not believe the things I built were beyond his reach. He did not believe my no had the same weight as his yes. The calm I felt was not forgiveness. It was not shock anymore either. It was the feeling of a door closing cleanly inside my chest. I turned around and walked past my suitcase, still standing beside the door. Colton's music was playing somewhere upstairs. I did not look back. The Uber had been waiting at the curb for 8 minutes. I got in and told the driver to take me to the Hilton on Michigan Avenue. At the hotel, I put the $2 bill on the desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the Cook County Recorder site. My father had signed a quitclaim deed on June 5th. He had waited while I traveled. He had used a key I trusted him with. He had not made a mistake. Then I booked the first flight to New York for Thursday morning. I did not know whether I had a case. I only knew I was done standing in a doorway, waiting for him to explain why I should accept less. My father believed he had made a practical family decision. He did not know that okay, Dad was the last sentence I would ever say to him. I want to tell you what happened next, because it is the part of the story I have been building the vocabulary for over the past 4 months. But before I go any further, if you've ever stood on the porch of a house you paid for and been handed $2 by the person who told you the house was yours, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this story reach the people who need it. And drop your city and the time where you're listening from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel at night. I'm Johanna. This is the story of a father who used his name on my deed to give part of my house to my cousin, an $800,000 townhouse in Bucktown. A $2 bill I still keep in a fireproof safe, and the 4 months it took for the truth about that deed to reach everyone he expected to protect him. To understand the deed, you have to understand my father. And to understand my father, you have to understand Colton and why, in my father's mind, a nephew from Cleveland was worth more than a daughter who had put 4 years into a house. My father, Nolan Thomas, is 58 years old. He grew up in the same western suburb of Chicago, where he still lives. He inherited a machine shop from his own father when he was 32, and he has run it honestly and reasonably competently for the last 26 years. It is not a big shop. He has 3 employees. But it has kept my parents in a comfortable 2-story house since before I was born. And my father, in his own quiet way, is proud of it. My father was a decent man in ways that made the rest harder to see. He did not drink. He did not shout. He remembered my birthday, helped me move into my first apartment, and told me he was proud when I got into college. But his kindness had rules. It showed up most reliably when I fit the role he had assigned me: daughter, helper, person who could be counted on to manage herself. The role he wanted most was a son. He never said that aloud. He would have been offended by the accusation. But it was the operating system underneath our family. My father had 1 child, me. His younger sister Vernell had a son, Colton. And from the time Colton was born, my father treated that nephew as the boy-shaped future he had been missing. Colton received gifts that felt like they belonged to a son. At Christmas, my father bought him tools, sports gear, and envelopes with cash. I got sweaters, books, and compliments about being so responsible. When Colton was 15 and got into trouble over a stolen car, my father quietly paid for a lawyer. Years later, I learned he had never told my mother about the check. The difference continued into adulthood. I got scholarships, finished college near the top of my class, and earned a banking job in Chicago. My father would say, "Nice work, honey," with the distant approval he might have given a neighbor's child. Colton dropped out of community college at 20. My father drove to Cleveland, took him to dinner, and told him he was proud that he had the courage to leave a system that was not working. I did not hate Colton for it. He was being rewarded for a hunger my father had chosen to carry. But I learned not to expect investment from Nolan Thomas. I learned to do impressive things for an audience that barely looked up. At family gatherings, Colton sat beside my father. I sat beside my mother. By the time I bought the townhouse, I had made a private peace with that imbalance. I understood my father's preference as an emotional fact, not a practical danger. Colton got the warmth, the rescue money, the language of possibility. I got the expectations. He was the person Dad imagined helping into a future. I was the person Dad assumed would build mine without help. That hurt, but it did not frighten me. I had learned how to live around it. I worked harder. I made plans that did not require his approval. I saved enough to buy a place where no one could tell me which room I belonged in. When Dad offered to co-sign, I saw it as the one area where he had finally chosen to help me in a concrete way. I did not think his preference for Colton could reach past family dinners and the small humiliations I had trained myself not to name. I did not think he would turn it into a legal claim against the life I had paid for. That was my mistake. I had mistaken emotional neglect for a boundary. I thought Dad could overlook what I earned without believing he had a right to distribute it. The quitclaim deed taught me otherwise. The pattern I had spent years minimizing had only been waiting for an asset large enough to reveal itself. My mother, Rosalind, left my father in 2015 when I was 18. She had been unhappy for years. She had lived with the machine shop, the son preference, and my father's belief that silence counted as peace until she finally ran out of room for it. She moved to Berkeley, rented a small apartment, and took a part-time job at a bookstore. I stayed in Chicago. I started college there that fall and, for my first year, still spent enough nights at Dad's house to see how much quieter it became after she left. My mother calls every Sunday. She is not a large presence in this story because she made her choice a decade ago. She could not change my father, and she was not going to keep teaching me that enduring him was the same thing as loving him. At 18, I thought she had abandoned the fight. At 28, I understood she had modeled an exit. She did not have money to help me buy a house. When I closed in 2021, she mailed a card and a $200 check. The card said she had known since I was 10 that I would build my own life. I cried when I read it. I did not cash the check. I put it in my desk drawer. My father sent a text. Congratulations. Good work. That was all. I filed it under Just Dad. I did not understand then what that filing would cost me. That contrast stayed with me more than I admitted. My mother had $200 and no claim on the deed, yet she treated the house as mine. My father had a name beside mine on paper and offered only a polite text. I did not know then which of those facts would matter more. I only knew which one felt like love. Colton had been drifting for most of his 20s. He was not cruel in the clean, deliberate way people like to describe a villain. He could be funny, charming, and convincing when he talked about whatever he planned to do next. The problem was that every plan required someone else to carry him. He had never held a real job for more than 8 months. He had moved between couches, borrowed from relatives, and treated small rescues as proof that the next rescue would arrive. By 26, he had become the family project, the person everyone described as figuring things out because admitting he was not would have required someone to stop helping him. My father was the person most willing to keep believing. Colton knew how to speak to Dad's weakness. He talked about opportunity, Chicago, and the future waiting around the corner if somebody would only give him a start. Dad heard ambition. I heard a man asking for another place to land. That does not make Colton innocent. He was old enough to know that a free room in Chicago was not a normal gift, especially when it came with a key to a cousin's house and no conversation with that cousin. But he had spent so long accepting help without examining its source that he treated Uncle Nolan's certainty as permission. By 2025, the person most often asked to turn that permission into something practical was his mother, Vernell. I need to explain Vernell because she is the reason the family consequences later matter. She is 56, warm, practical, and one of the few adults in my father's family who had always made me feel seen. When I was little, she baked the birthday cakes my mother did not have time to make. When I graduated college, she drove from Cleveland to Chicago in an old Camry because she did not trust the Camry on long trips, but trusted herself even less to miss my ceremony. She raised Colton largely alone after his father left when he was 6. She loved him, worried about him, and spent years keeping him fed while he drifted between jobs, couches, and plans that never became anything. But she was not blind to every weakness in him. She simply believed her brother Nolan was helping in the way brothers help sisters. With a spare room, a contact, maybe some money when things were bad. That was what Nolan told her. He did not tell her he was using Colton to take part of a house that belonged, in every practical sense, to me. Vernell trusted him because he was her older brother. Colton trusted him because he had spent his life being told Uncle Nolan would make things easier. Neither of them understood that my father had turned their trust into the mechanism for hurting me. That betrayal is why the family eventually turned on him. It was not only that he tried to take from his daughter, it was that he made his sister's son part of it without telling either of them the truth. In early 2025, Colton began calling my father more often. He talked about Cleveland as though it were holding him back. He talked about Chicago as though the city itself had been waiting for him. I could really make something happen there, he told my father, according to Vernell. He did not have a job offer. He did not have savings. He did not have a lease, a roommate, or a plan that survived more than a few sentences. What he had was my father on the other end of the phone, responding to possibility as though possibility were achievement. My father listened to those imaginary prospects with more excitement than he had ever shown for my actual work. When I got promoted, he sent a text. When Colton said he might come to Chicago, Dad began calling Vernell to talk about giving the boy a start. By spring, he had decided Colton needed a place in Chicago. He had also decided he was going to be generous with something that was not his to give. I did not know any of this. I was newly promoted to associate that January, traveling for pitches, and often out of town 15 days a month. I trusted my father. Years earlier, I had given him a spare key to the townhouse so he could water plants, take in packages, or check on the place when I traveled. He had used it only with my permission. I had never imagined I needed to ask whether he would use the key when I was gone to show someone around. On June 5th, 2025, he used that access differently. He met Colton at my kitchen table with a notary and signed a quit-claim deed transferring what he described as his half-interest in the joint tenancy to Colton. The deed was filed with the Cook County Recorder that week. My father did not call. He did not send a text. He did not ask whether I wanted my cousin living in the house I had paid for. He simply waited. I was in San Francisco on a 5-day work trip from Friday, June 20th, through Wednesday, June 25th. My father knew the dates because I had told him I would be gone and asked him to keep an eye on the place. On Sunday, June 22nd, Colton flew in from Cleveland. My father gave him the spare key. Colton changed the locks, moved into my primary bedroom, and spent 3 days treating my house like a favor my father had arranged for him. He had friends over. He used my kitchen. He drank beer from glasses I had bought. He wore my bathrobe. On Wednesday, June 25th, I came home from the airport with my suitcase and my key, stood on my own front steps, and found out that the man I trusted to watch my house had used the key to take it away. And the rest you already know. The next morning, Thursday, June 26th, I flew to New York. I flew there because my best friend from college, Corinne Hale, was a partner in a real estate litigation practice in Manhattan and licensed in both New York and Illinois. Her firm had a Chicago litigation team, but Corinne was the person I trusted to tell me whether I had a case before I let anyone speak for me. 4 years earlier, at my closing, she had joked that I should call her if my father ever tried anything funny. Neither of us had believed I would need to. I spent the flight replaying the foyer. Colton in my bathrobe, my father's hand holding out $2, the way he had said half the house, as though he were giving away a lawnmower. I did not sleep. I pulled the quitclaim filing from the Cook County Recorder site on my phone, read it until the words blurred, then read it again. At 10 on Thursday morning, I walked into Corinne's office with one carry-on, no place to sleep in Chicago that night, and a question I had not yet said aloud. Did my father actually have the right to do this? And I was done asking permission. Corinne was 32, married with one child, and the same severe Navy suits she had worn in college mock trial. She hugged me once, then sat me at a conference table. "Johanna," she said, "start at closing. Give me dates, documents, and every conversation you remember. We need a timeline." I gave her one, the April 2021 closing, my $80,000 down payment, 4 years of mortgage payments from my checking account, every one on the 5th, property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, and repairs. The email in which Dad told me the house was mine and asked me to save it. The June 5th quitclaim deed. The spare key he had used to let Colton in. And the 3 days Colton had spent in my bedroom before I came home. By Friday night, June 27th, I had sent her every bank record, receipt, closing document, and email I could locate. I stayed in New York through Saturday while her team reviewed them. Corinne listened without interrupting. When I finished, she spread the records across the table. The closing file, the payment history, Dad's email, the quitclaim deed, and the dates of my work trip. "This is not a simple co-signer dispute," she said. "Your father is on title, so we cannot walk into court pretending the paperwork does not exist. But the question is why he was put there, what both of you intended at closing, and whether he used that title in a way that contradicts the agreement he made with you." I asked, "Do I have a case?" "You have a serious one." She tapped Dad's email. "This matters because it is contemporaneous. It says the house was yours, that his role was to help with credit, and that he expected to come off the deed when you refinanced. Your down payment matters. Your payment history matters. The fact that he contributed nothing matters. And the timing of the transfer while you were out of town after he used a key you gave him to protect the house matters." What would we file? A verified complaint in Cook County asking the court to determine the parties' equitable interests, cancel the quitclaim deed if the court finds he had no beneficial interest to transfer, and quiet title. We will also ask for emergency relief to preserve the status quo while the case is pending. Can you get Colton out? I cannot promise that on day one, but we can seek a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. The immediate goal is to stop further transfers and stop him treating your primary residence as his free apartment. The judge will want documents, not outrage. Fortunately, you have documents. I looked at the papers again. For the first time since my key failed, I could see a path that was not begging. How long? Emergency relief could be heard in weeks. The larger case could take months. Your records make us stronger, not certain. I nodded. Can Dad make me pay for this? He can force you to spend money defending your home. That is already happening. Corinne's voice softened. We can ask for fees and other relief if the court finds his conduct was in bad faith. But I do not want to sell you a verdict before we file a complaint. That was the first thing anyone had said to me in 36 hours that made me feel safer. Not that winning was guaranteed, but that someone had finally separated what we could prove from what I wanted to be true. I sat with that for a long moment. Corinne let me sit. She had always known how to do that. On Saturday, June 28th, we made a plan. I would return to Chicago, move into a furnished month-to-month apartment, and let her Chicago team file on Tuesday, July 1st. I would not contact Dad. I would not confront Colton. I would preserve every message, every receipt, every photograph of the changed locks, and every record of what I had paid. Then Corinne asked the question I had been avoiding. This will become public inside the family, she said. Your father will know you are challenging him. Colton will know. Are you prepared for them to call you cruel? I thought about the $2 bill in my purse. I'm prepared for them to call me whatever they need to call me, I said. I am not giving up my house. Corinne nodded. Then we filed Tuesday. I flew back to Chicago on Sunday, June 29th. On July 1st, her Chicago team filed the verified complaint and the emergency motion in Cook County Circuit Court. For the first time since I stood outside my own front door, I had done something other than leave. What happened over the next 4 months was slower than the moment on my front steps and harder to explain at family dinners. Filing the case did not give me my house back. It gave the fight a case number, deadlines, and a stack of papers my father could no longer dismiss as me being upset. I was still in a furnished apartment in the Loop. Colton was still sleeping in my room. I was still paying my mortgage, lawyers, and rent for a place I did not want. But the secret had become a legal fact. And once that happened, people around Nolan had to decide what they were willing to believe. On Tuesday, July 1st, Corinne's Chicago team filed a verified complaint in Cook County Circuit Court against Nolan and Colton. It asked the court to determine the equitable ownership of the townhouse, cancel the quitclaim deed if Nolan had transferred an interest he did not truly own, and quiet title in my name. At the same time, they filed an emergency motion asking the court to preserve the property while the case moved forward. I moved into a furnished month-to-month apartment in the Loop. I paid for it myself. I did not tell my father where I was staying. I did not answer his calls. I did not speak to him. The person I did speak to was Delphine. Delphine is Colton's older sister. She is 30, a physical therapist in Cleveland, and the person in their family who had spent years quietly cleaning up after the chaos Colton left behind. We were not close, but we had liked each other in the distant way cousins can. When I was promoted to associate, she sent flowers. She called me Sunday, July 6th. Her voice was tight. Johanna, I need the truth. Did Uncle Nolan give Colton part of your house? Did you know? No, I said. I found out when I came home and my key did not work. She went silent. Then she said, my mother didn't know either. Colton told her Uncle Nolan had found him a room in a rental property. She thought he was helping him get established in Chicago. I told her I had filed suit. I told her I was not trying to punish her family. I was trying to get back into my home. Johanna, she said, you do not have to explain that to me. She told me Vernell had been on the phone with Nolan for most of the morning. At first, Dad had said it was a misunderstanding. He was on the deed. Colton needed a start. I was upset because I had been surprised. Then, Vernell asked the question he could not answer cleanly. Did Joe know you were giving Colton a key to her house? Delphine said he went quiet. What happened next was not a movie-style family vote. Nobody held a meeting and declared my father exiled. Vernell called the relatives closest to the situation, her sisters, my grandfather, the cousins who knew Colton was going to Chicago. Some were shocked. Some tried to stay neutral. A few called me privately to say they were sorry. But the important change was simple. Nolan no longer had Vernell's help or her silence. The person he had expected to defend him understood that he had made her son part of a theft. Delphine said, Mom is done covering for him. So am I. We will tell your lawyer whatever we know about what Colton was told. I asked whether Colton knew it was my house. He knew it was yours, she said quietly. He says Uncle Nolan told him you were fine with it. He says he believed him. That did not make Colton innocent. It made him exactly what he had always been, willing to accept a gift without asking what it cost someone else. The call lasted 22 minutes. By the end, Delphine had forwarded me the text in which Colton told Vernell he was moving into Uncle Nolan's place in Chicago. It was not proof of ownership. It was proof that even Colton had been told a version of the story that left me out. I cried after that call. Not because the lawsuit had suddenly become easy. It had not. I cried because someone from that side of the family had finally said the sentence I needed to hear. This was not normal, and I was not cruel for refusing it. The hearing on the preliminary injunction was August 14th. Corinne came to Chicago. I sat in the second row of the Chancery courtroom in a dark gray suit, while her Chicago co-counsel argued that the court did not need to decide the entire ownership case that morning. It only needed to decide whether the property should be protected while the case was pending. Nolan's lawyer argued that Nolan was a joint tenant on the deed and had the right to transfer his interest. He said Colton had moved in believing he had been given a legitimate place to live. He said the family disagreement should not be converted into an emergency. Corinne did not call it a family disagreement. She put up the April 2021 closing documents, the $80,000 down payment from my account, 48 mortgage payments from my checking account, 4 years of taxes, insurance, HOA fees, and repairs. Nolan's email saying the house was mine and that his name was only there to help with credit. The June 5th quitclaim. The June 22nd key handoff. My business trip itinerary. Photos of my changed locks. Then she said, Mr. Thomas may have had legal title on paper. The issue before this court is whether he was entitled to use that paper to dispossess the person who paid for, maintained, and occupied the home. No one clapped. No one gasped. It was not television. The judge asked questions about the closing, about the email, about whether Colton had paid rent or contributed to the property. His lawyer had answers for some of them, not good ones. The judge did not decide the ownership case that day. She entered an order preventing any further transfer, lien, or change to the property. She also ordered Colton to vacate within 30 days, while the case moved through discovery, finding that the evidence showed I had a strong claim to possess the home, and that leaving him there would keep causing harm that money could not easily fix. Colton moved out on September 15th. He took my bathrobe. He left behind 3 empty beer bottles in the recycling bin, a broken cabinet hinge, and a forwarding address in Cleveland. I did not go back inside. Corinne told me not to until we had a clearer order and a locksmith could change the locks again with notice to everyone involved. I stayed in the furnished apartment and kept working. September was discovery. That word sounded clinical. In practice, it meant documents arriving in batches and every document making the story a little less deniable. Nolan produced his financial records. They showed no mortgage payments, no property tax payments, no insurance payments, and no rental income from the townhouse. Colton produced messages with Dad about coming to Chicago. There was no message from me inviting him. No lease, no agreement about rent, no conversation where I said he could use my bedroom, change my locks, or bring friends into the house. There were moments in September when I wanted the case to be simpler than it was. I wanted a single document that said Dad had stolen my house, a single answer that made every person who had minimized it stop. Instead, there were spreadsheets, deposition notices, motions, and hours when Corinne's team asked me to find another receipt from 2022. I found them. I found the plumber invoice, the HOA special assessment, the insurance renewal, and the receipt for the lock Dad had helped me install after a package theft 2 years earlier. That last receipt hurt more than I expected. He had stood in my foyer then, held the new deadbolt in his hand, and told me to make sure I always knew where the spare key was. In June, he had used that same spare key to let Colton take over the house. By trial, I was no longer trying to make the court understand my father's character. I was showing the court the decisions he had made, one document at a time. Vernell gave a deposition in late September. She did not make a speech. She answered questions. She said Nolan told her Colton was moving into a property he owned. She said she did not know it was my home. She said that, had she known, she would have told Colton not to go. The case was set for a bench trial on October 17th. It lasted 2 days. The court calendar left little room. I testified on the first afternoon. Corinne asked about the closing, my payments, the email, and the key. I answered from the records. I did not look at Dad while I did it. I had spent too much of my life measuring my words by his face. I was done doing that. Nolan did testify. His lawyer called him because by October, there was no way to explain the email without him. He said he had always intended to remain a partial owner. He said the phrase, "the house is yours," was reassurance, not an agreement. He said he believed Colton would look after the place while I traveled. On cross-examination, Corinne showed him the 4 years of payments. Then she showed him the June email chain with Colton, including the line, "Joe is out all week. I'll get you in Sunday." Dad read it once. Then he looked down. The judge took the matter under advisement overnight. On Wednesday, October 22nd, the court entered judgment. The written order found that Nolan's name had been placed on title to support financing, while Johanna had supplied the down payment, carried the mortgage, and paid every cost of ownership. It found that his later transfer to Colton conflicted with the understanding documented at closing and in his own email. The court canceled the quitclaim deed and quieted title in my name. The order also required Nolan to reimburse a substantial portion of my attorney's fees, $28,300, because the court found that his concealment, the timing of the transfer, and the use of my spare key had forced litigation that should never have been necessary. It did not say he was evil. It did not need to. It said the townhouse was mine. By then, I knew the number on the order mattered less than the sentence underneath it. Nolan Thomas had no interest left to give away. The recorder's office accepted the judgment for recording that afternoon. My name was the only name left on the title. I read the order in Corinne's Chicago office with the $2 bill in my purse. Then I put the bill back where it belonged. That was his problem. It was not anymore mine. The calls began after the judgment, not because the whole family suddenly agreed on what had happened, but because the written order made it harder to call the story a misunderstanding. Vernell called me Thursday evening, October 23rd. She was crying before she said hello. "Johanna," she said, "I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions before I let Colton believe he had a place in Chicago." "You trusted your brother," I said. "So did you." That was the only apology that mattered. She did not tell me everyone had abandoned Nolan. She did not make promises about what the family would do next. She said she had told him she would not help pay his lawyer, would not ask me to drop the case, and would not keep pretending he had done something generous. She said Colton was back in Cleveland with her for the moment, and that she had told him he needed to find work and make his own arrangements. Then she asked, "Can I still be your aunt?" "Yes," I said. "Of course." The next call was from Delphine. She did not sound triumphant. She sounded tired. "Mom is done protecting Uncle Nolan," she said. "Some people are furious. Some people are trying not to choose sides. But he cannot tell the family that you made this up anymore." "I never wanted a side," I said. "I know." "That is why this is on him." She forwarded 2 messages her mother had saved from June. One from Colton saying Uncle Nolan had found him a place in Chicago, and another from Nolan telling Vernell, "Joe is traveling. It will be easier to explain after he is settled." Neither message decided the case by itself. The court had already done that. But together they explained why Vernell had stopped defending the version of Nolan she had believed in. My mother called from Berkeley later that night. She had known the case was moving toward a decision because I had kept her informed, but she had not read the order yet. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not because you won, because you stopped asking him to make room for you." I cried after that call, not because everyone had finally seen what I saw. Some people still had not. I cried because the people who mattered were no longer asking me to pretend it had been normal. There were other messages over the next 2 days. A cousin I had not spoken to since college wrote, "I'm sorry this happened." My grandfather did not call me. He sent a card through Vernell with no advice in it, only the line, "You paid for your home. I hope you get to rest in it." One of Nolan's brothers said he did not want to be involved. Another said nothing at all. That was more believable than a chorus. Families do not become moral in one afternoon. They become quieter around the person who made everyone uncomfortable. Nolan had spent years being the competent brother, the man with the shop and the paid-off house and the opinions people deferred to. After the judgment, some relatives were angry with him. Some were embarrassed. Some simply stopped returning his calls. What he lost was not every person he had ever known. It was the assumption that he could define reality and expect the rest of us to protect the definition. I did not need to hear every consequence. I only needed to know that no one was calling me to ask whether I would forgive him enough to make their holidays easier. The $2 bill is in a small Ziploc bag in my fireproof safe now. I have not spent it, and I do not think I ever will. I keep it because it is the closest my father ever came to putting his real opinion of me into an object I could hold. He did not write it down. He did not need to. He stood in my foyer, looked at the home I had paid for, and offered me $2 as though the insult would become reasonable if it had a number on it. For a long time, I thought the bill meant he believed I was worth $2. Now I think it means something slightly different. He believed my work, my payments, and my claim to my own life could be dismissed with $2 because he had never bothered to calculate their value. He had treated me as the reliable daughter, the one who would earn, absorb, adjust, and eventually make room for whatever he wanted to give a man. The court did not put a price on me. It did something simpler. It recognized that the townhouse was mine and that my father had no right to distribute it. The fee order mattered because it made him bear part of the cost he had forced on me, but it was never a measure of what I was worth. I like the court's sentence better than his. The house is yours. If you've ever kept a physical object as a permanent record of what someone tried to convince you was true about yourself, a receipt, a card, a $2 bill, tell me below what you kept and why. I think we all have some object like that. Mine is in a Ziploc bag. After the order, I learned to separate legal resolution from personal closure. The court had decided who owned the townhouse. It could not decide whether Colton understood what he had accepted, whether Nolan regretted what he had done, or whether an apology would mean anything after 4 months of silence. I stopped following the details because I did not need them to feel finished. I had spent enough time reading other people's messages, saving receipts, and waiting for a judge to say what should have been obvious. I was not going to turn their aftermath into another job. That was the boundary I kept. No more investigations. No more family updates unless they affected the order. And no reply merely because someone finally felt uncomfortable. My father is still in the suburbs. His shop is still open, though I hear business has been uneven. He owes the $28,300 the court ordered him to contribute toward my fees, and he has lawyers and bills he did not have before. I do not know whether he borrowed the money, sold something, or asked someone else to carry it. I have stopped asking Vernell for updates. I know Colton is back in Cleveland. I know Vernell told him he could stay only while he found work and paid something toward his own life. I know he sent me one email through Corinne's office. It said he was sorry he had believed Nolan and sorry he had used my room. He did not ask for forgiveness. I did not answer. I did not need to decide whether he was a villain or a fool in order to decide that he had no place in my house. As for Dad, I do not feel triumphant. The feeling I have is quieter than that. For most of my life, thinking about him meant trying to earn an attention he gave out unevenly. That jumble is gone. I do not hate him. I do not wait for an apology that would restore anything. I do not want him at my wedding, if I have one, or in the room when I become a mother, if I do. I do not want letters. I do not want a final conversation. The last conversation I wanted with him happened in my foyer. It lasted 2 seconds. It cost $2. I moved on. That is not the same as saying he lost everything. I do not know that, and I do not need it to be true. Some relatives remain in contact with him. Others do not. Vernell no longer covers for him, and that is the consequence with the most weight because she had spent years smoothing over the damage Colton caused and trusting Nolan to be the solid one. What changed was not a family vote. It was the end of automatic protection. Nolan can no longer count on the people around him to explain away what he did or ask the women he hurt to absorb it, so everyone else can feel comfortable again. That is enough of an ending for him. Mine is different. Mine is a house with my name on it, a lock that answers to my key, and a life I do not have to defend before I am allowed to live in it. My mother came to Chicago on Friday, October 24th. She took a room near the Loop and met me outside the townhouse the next morning with a bottle of Barolo from 2016, the year I graduated college, and a paper bag full of groceries. I moved back into my house on Saturday, October 25th, 3 days after the judgment was entered and recorded. A locksmith met Corinne's Chicago co-counsel and me that morning. Colton had vacated on September 15th under the temporary order, but I had waited to move back until title was quieted and the court's order had been recorded. We changed every lock, canceled the old spare key, and documented the condition of the rooms before I carried my suitcase upstairs. The bathrobe was gone. Colton had taken it when he left. That was the last small thing he took from me, and standing in my empty bedroom with a locksmith's invoice in my hand, I laughed. We went inside after the locksmith finished. The house smelled like old smoke, stale beer, and the citrus cleaner the crew had used on the counters. Mom stood in the kitchen for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "You should not have had to fight this hard to come home." "No," I said. That was enough. We spent Saturday opening windows, washing dishes Colton had left behind, and making lists of small repairs. On Sunday, I cooked roast chicken at the kitchen island. Mom slept in the guest room. Neither of us mentioned the primary bedroom until breakfast, when she looked down the hall and said, "I'm glad you took it back." So was I. Before she flew home, she held my face in both hands and said, "The house is yours because you paid for it." But the woman who filed the case sat through the hearings and kept going when people called her cruel. That woman is yours too. No one gave her to you. I have thought about that sentence often. I am 28. I live in the Bucktown townhouse I bought at 24 and paid for every month after that. My mother visits twice a year. Vernell and I still speak. Delphine sends me pictures of her dogs. I have not rebuilt every relationship on that side of the family, and I do not need to. I have learned that peace is not the same thing as pretending nothing happened. Corinne is coming to Chicago in December for a girls' weekend. I took 4 consecutive days off for it, which would have sounded impossible to the 24-year-old who thought every hour had to become equity. The $2 bill is still in the safe. It is not there to make me angry. It is there because I want to remember the difference between what my father assumed he could take and what I was willing to protect. He gave me $2. I gave myself the house back, not by magic, not because a court thought I was special, but because I kept the records, asked for help, and refused to disappear from the place I had built, bought and paid for, then fought for. The math worked out. There are still nights when I unlock the front door after a late flight and pause before I step inside. For a second, I remember standing on the stoop with a key that no longer worked. Then the lock turns, the door opens, and the house is quiet. That quiet used to frighten me. Now it sounds like ownership.